Hey guys, welcome to tonight's Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair Live. As you can see, I went a little spooky this evening for our display. I hope you enjoy that. I'm running a little late, so we're just going to jump into it, get started. So just bear with me while I get that podcast going.
Everyone here at the Rift Radio Network would like to welcome you to tonight's special broadcast. This work is protected by Creative Commons license. And now, a word from our sponsors.
Beyond Earth Healing, your source for alternative and holistic full healing services by Reverend Kayla Ray. Beyond Earth Healing offers various approaches to energy healing to match your healing needs. She is led by her guides, angels, and more to help you heal. Located out of Lockport, New York, you may contact her at 716-550-3881 or at www.beyondearthhealing.com.
The Skeleton Key. This mystical shop, found exclusively on Facebook, is stationed in Blossom, Texas. Purchase all of your very own unique religious, spiritual, and metaphysical items, to include the beginner altar kits. Find them today on Facebook. Remember, you've always had the key.
Welcome to the Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. And now, your host, Christina Spencer.
Well, hello there. Come on in and get cozy by the fireplace. Let me get settled into my old rocking chair, and I'll tell you a couple stories. Haunting stories. Stories that are not for the faint of heart. Some of these stories may not be about hauntings per se, but nonetheless will haunt you. Because after all, some of the most scary things in life are not ghosts and demons, but the people we cross on the street. If you're brave enough, keep listening. If not, get up and leave now, because you'll never be the same. Don't say I didn't warn you. Welcome to the Haunting Stories from the Old Rocking Chair. My Dad Witnessed a Ghost at Work. True story. By K. Marie, with double A's and double E's. Okay, so my dad has always been the type of guy where he doesn't believe in anything unless he witnesses it for himself. He's a pretty macho guy and isn't into all that fairy tale and ghost nonsense. Yet, that all changed for him one day. It was around 2:30 in the afternoon when my dad came home. He works the night shift at the old El Reno prison. He says it's a pretty laid-back job for the most part. He'll usually drive around the prison in one of the guard trucks or keep watch in the towers, but one night he was sent to do a sweep of the chapel, as to make sure no one was in there who wasn't supposed to be. His boss, let's call him Jack, told him to come back and check in with him after he was done. My dad walks through the yard out to the chapel, and as soon as he walks in, he said he felt just a wave of nervousness come over him. He flicked on the old lights and walked in and began to check all around the room. After a couple of minutes, he said a man, dressed in the same uniform as him, walked out from the little office in the back. My dad asked the man if he was already doing the sweep of the chapel, and the man replied, "Yes, I'll take it from here." So, confused as to why he was sent out there to check the chapel, my dad just gave a little, "Oh, okay, I'll let Jack know." My dad returned to his boss about 15 minutes after he had sent him. Jack looked at him and asked, "How did you get it done so fast? You couldn't have possibly checked that whole place in such a short amount of time." "Another guard is already in there, and he said he'll check it," my dad said. And I guess Jack didn't think anything of it as long as the chapel was checked. Everything was fine with him. Well, this is where it gets creepy. About 3 days after, my dad, he was walking down the halls of the prison and stopped to look at the display case of all the old photos of other guards in the past. As he was browsing the photos, he said his heart sank and his blood froze. One of the pictures he came across was the very same guard he had encountered in the chapel, only the guard was dead. Apparently, about 4 years before my dad started working there, a riot had broken out in the chapel and a guard was stabbed to death, and that guard was the same man my dad had seen in the old chapel. But out of the 12 years of working there, not once had he ever heard about the riot until now. I don't know if they just don't talk about it, scared it might run off some of the newbies, or it was just something a lot of them had forgotten about. All I can say is, my dad is now a firm believer in the paranormal. And not once has he ever gone back into the creepy chapel. Camping Horror Story by Tessa Engine 756. A little background to the story. I'm Tessa and I'm 14 years old. I live in Minnesota and I go to this one campground up north in kind of the middle of nowhere. I've gone to that campground for about 11 years and still go there to this day. It's been open for only a year or two before I started going there. My mom is really popular there. We know everyone. They're always having a party or staying up till 1 o'clock getting drunk. This particular night haunts me forever. Me and my friend Chloe were best friends. She was a shy brunette and I was the wild blonde. She always had the thing where she never liked to do sleepovers or anything. This one night, her and I planned on having a sleepover in a tent outside our actual camper. Our parents didn't stay out late for some reason that night, and we had a fire and did regular camping things. It was about 1 a.m. when we decided to go to the shower house, which is a place that has the showers and the bathrooms and stuff like that. It was one of the best campgrounds in North America, and that's a fact. It's not my opinion, and it's actually a fact. So we were in the shower house planning to just hang out because the shower house and the lodge is the only place that you can get Wi-Fi. My data doesn't work out in the middle of nowhere, and so we planned on staying there till 3 a.m. When about 2 a.m., our batteries start to go low, so we need to go get chargers. We go to the camper and grab our chargers. On our way back, we're outside the door for some fresh air before we go back inside, and Chloe's on her phone. Around the corner behind her is an old guy, or maybe a woman. They looked to be like 100 years old, and it looked like it was walking a rat, like a real rat. Well, it looks like one at least. I don't know actually what it was. I screamed and tell her what I see, and the guy has a crazy smile on his face. Run as fast as our long legs led us about 2 steps till we get inside. I start crying because I'm so scared, and she's freaking out because she doesn't know what was just behind her. We plug in our chargers and hesitate to call either of our parents. We feel like they would get really mad at us and not even believe us. And again, we're out at 3 a.m. We were not even supposed to be up till 1 on this night, so now we're really freaking out. We decided the best course of action is just to bust out the door. We stood there and hesitated for a little while, but we ended up opening the door and running for it. I turn around and see the creepy old man with something that looks like a knife in his hand just around the corner. We almost got stabbed. To this day, we almost always remember this night. Our parents believe us, and they were really mad because we didn't call them. By the way, I'm a huge fan and hope I get featured. Northern Maine, written by Nicklamy123. This is a true story. My step-brother and I were 14 and 16 years old at our remote cabin in Maine. My stepmother is Native American, so the cabin is on tribal land. It is about an hour's ride on old logging roads. To give you an example, there is no cell service and you cannot hear anything because there's no noise pollution. There are two cabins on the little stretch of lake. One to the left of us is run down and the other one to the right of us is kept up, but not the nicest. I always carry my 20-gauge shotgun when up there to kill small birds and rabbits. I had just gotten my .40 Smith & Wesson as my birthday present and thought I was very cool walking around with it on my hip. I pull it out and shoot it at trees, and I got pretty good before the trip. It was the first night. My father always brings the generator so we have power for the night. The first night was fine and there was no incident. The second day, my stepbrother and I went out riding on our ATV. I was driving and we were going pretty fast. We had just rounded this corner, and to the side of the road I noticed a man. The first thing that struck out to me was his facial hair. His beard was stained a dark red like he had been eating something bloody. It was moose season, so we assumed that maybe he had gutted a moose and blood had gotten on him, but he didn't have a gun on him, so it seemed different. But then I just thought he left his gun by the kill, and then I thought we had never heard shots and how quiet it was, and we would have heard the shots. For some reason I stopped the ATV. Because of my age and how cool I thought I was, I suited my side so he could see I have a Glock on me. He dismissed this, and we asked him what he was doing on this remote stretch of road. He then replied in a rough, deep voice, "Hunting." We then said, because we're dumb, "Well, that seems fun. See ya, mister," and I sped off. When we were driving back, I let my stepbrother drive back. We passed the spot again. I looked off into the thick underbrush and didn't see anything or anyone. We got back to the cabin and I told my dad what had happened. He told me he was probably just hunting and my stepmother seemed scared like always, and my father told her it was fine. A couple of hours later, we were eating dinner and it was dusk. My father, an avid fisherman, took himself and my stepbrother out on the lake while my stepmom and I stayed at the cabin. It was about 30 minutes before dark and my dog Ginger was sleeping. My father and stepbrother had still not gotten back yet. All of a sudden, Ginger stood up, and with it being so quiet, I could also hear sticks snapping and leaves rustling around. My stepmom was inside and didn't do anything when Ginger barked. I, being the cool young kid, but also very scared of being so far out in the woods, ran into the cabin and got my stepmother and told her what was going on, and she told me don't scare her. I reassured her I was not, and to go down to the lake and go call for my dad. I was now scared because there was little to no light and the generator was not on and we had not started the fire yet. I yelled for Ginger to come back and she did, but she had a little bit of odor on her which seemed to me to be different. But because of what was going on, I was so focused on the woods I didn't think about it. My father came up from the lake with a bass in his hand and told me it was an animal and not to scare my stepmom like that. I told him I was not joking and I thought it was the guy from the road earlier. He then said, "Okay, here's the flashlight, go find out." I then was skeptical, but I grabbed the flashlight from his hand and went out with Ginger. As soon as I entered the trees, I drew out my gun, clicked off my safety, and pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sticks breaking. Ginger then froze. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she then growled a deep growl. I watched from the back of the tree the man step out at this point. I was thinking to myself, he's stalking us. What the hell do I do? Do I shoot him? Should I demand to see his hands? I just yelled at him, what the frick did he think he was doing? And then I told him I would shoot him if he didn't walk away. Now, I was 14 and not very scary, and he looked at me and smiled. And the way he smiled with his decaying teeth was so disgusting, and the way he looked at me like I was nothing, it sent chills down my spine. Ginger then barked very loudly, and I screamed to my dad, "Help! Get the guns!" The man then almost tried to lunge at me, and I shot at him. It hit him in the upper shoulder. It didn't even seem to stop him. I then turned and ran, Ginger hot on my heels, the man still charging at me, and I kept screaming and running just so hard I was so scared, and he didn't stop. My dad then ran out of the cabin with a 9mm in his hand. All he could see was the flashlight going up and down, and my arms were pumping, running from the man. I was just about to get to the dirt driveway when another man came from behind the huge boulder. I quickly ducked, and the man's eyes were just beady, dark, black, soulless, no pupils like a deer's eye. These men then stopped dead in their tracks. The man behind me told me I better stop, and for some dumb reason I did. I pulled out my gun and shot right above the man that came from behind the rock. He said in a monotone voice, "That was a mistake." My dad, who had just rounded the bend of the driveway, yelled at the men to go or he'll shoot. I whirled around. The man who started the attack, his shoulder was bleeding, but he didn't even notice it. I then told him to back up or I would drop him. He did nothing of the kind. He just looked at me and smiled that creepy smile again, and which I should never have done. I regretted to this day. I shot him 3 times in the chest. He dropped like a rag doll, just crumpled up on the ground. My dad was distracted after this, but kept an eye on the guy. The man tried to lunge at my father. My dad then shot this guy, and he laid on the ground. Still alive, we then ran to the cabin, locked the door, and hid under the stairs. We tried to call the police, but our calls wouldn't go through. We tried and tried, but the calls wouldn't connect. I looked out the door window and saw the man who was behind the rock standing up, blood running down his chest and from his mouth. He started to run towards the cabin. He slammed into the door. Blood was dripping on the window, and he fell to the ground. He then stood up, punched the glass with his fist, and shattered it. We were all screaming for him to leave. Dad then pulled his rifle out and shot the man in the head. The way the bullet hit the man and his head flew back, he just dropped. It still doesn't seem real to this day. Nothing of that day seemed real. The cops then told us that they were not in the system. They had no idea of who they are, and to this day we haven't gone back to that cabin. The Morning Visitor, written by Method Writer 85. I had this supervisor named Kate. One day we had a discussion that turned into the unexplained, and she told me about something that happened when she was a teenager. She tried to debunk crazy things that have happened, but this one she just hasn't been able to do. It was the summer after she graduated from high school, sometime in the second half of the 1990s. She was 18 at the time. Her friend Billy was a few years older, but still lived with his mother in their house. This was in a small city in western Maryland, and Billy's house had just enough land that he could throw a raging day-to-night summer party complete with bonfire. At the same time, they weren't totally isolated, and random people from their surrounding neighborhoods would show up to his parties all the time. One day, Billy met this skater kid named Nick at a park one morning, and being a social animal guy, Billy invited him to hang out with him at his house. Billy probably also took some pity on Nick, because Nick told him he was a runaway who was living at the park. They would basically play video games, go on rides, and party till late at night. Nick started showing up every day at Billy's house, knocking on the door at 7 a.m. sharp, and engaging him in the morning till night drinking. He was about 16 with dark eyes and dark spiky hair. Remember, this was the 90s after all, and seemed fairly normal in everything except for a couple of things. First was that he always wore the same thing, a plain t-shirt and a pair of camo print cargo shorts. Despite the fact that he was sleeping at the park, his clothes always looked clean. The second is that he never had been seen eating or going to the bathroom, despite the fact that Nick was drinking heavily with Billy. Finally, odd enough, no one remembers actually feeling Nick's skin, even my supervisor, who had sat next to him in a car during a road trip. She hung out with Billy and Nick at Billy's house 2 times, and each time she and her friend felt like something was very off with Nick, especially when he would give off this laugh, and that just sounded very evil and maniacal. He also seemed to get kookier and weirder when they went on a road trip and got further away from Billy's city. Nick would never also show his gun collection. Finally, Billy's hospitality reached its limits. After 2 weeks of waking Billy up at 7 a.m. to go party, Billy snapped at Nick at his front door. He said, "Look, Nick, you've been coming here every morning for 2 weeks. You're waking my mother up, who's trying to sleep. You really need to go now. Please, just come back later." Then he slammed the door shut, and Nick never showed up again. Billy came to Katie a little bit later with a newspaper article. It was about Nick, who had apparently killed himself. Nick had escaped from the mental asylum his parents put him in that was located in Billy's hometown. He got to his father's house and shot himself with his father's gun. Billy was originally upset because he felt like he must have put Nick over the edge when he kicked him out, until he checked the date. Nick had committed suicide on July 10th. That was 2 weeks before they even met. I Would Not Belong to Him, written by Devil Doll X. This happened 2 years ago on the day of my 28th birthday. I was working at a small double-sided drive-through only coffee stand about 30 minutes outside of Seattle. I'd been working there for about a year at this point and was always scheduled to work the closing shift during the week and the opening shift on the weekends. In the 7 years I had worked as a barista at this point, I had never been confronted with a situation that challenged my feeling of security while working alone. And despite having heard numerous stories over the years of other baristas in the area who have suffered violent or dangerous interactions with some of their customers, I considered myself fortunate not to have to place myself among them. Unfortunately, on this day, that would change. Thursday, November 7th, at 6:45 p.m., I was preparing to close the stand at 7 p.m. like usual. It was very rare that I would have customers come through the stand past 6:30, and because of this, I felt myself jump slightly when I looked up from the espresso machine I was cleaning to see a man standing behind the glass of the closed window beside me. Adding to my alarm was the fact that he made no noise whatsoever as he approached the stand, and made no attempt to grab my attention once he got there. Instead, he stood behind the window in complete silence, his mouth awkwardly fixed into an unnatural-looking smile. At first, I wasn't even sure he was a customer at all, considering the idea he might be part of a large group of transients and homeless that were known at the time to reside in the area, and who occasionally came up to the stand to ask for free coffee or water. For safety reasons, I typically refrained from serving walk-up customers after dusk, but because he now knew I had seen him, the rules of good customer service required that I at least acknowledge the fact that he was there. So reluctantly, I decided to serve him. He introduced himself as Ivan. He was around my age, seemed reasonably well kept, in the sense that his clothing and overall appearance looked pretty clean, and despite a slight Eastern European accent, his English was very good. His eyes, however, were utterly unnerving. His gaze made my stomach feel uneasy. Immediately, my intuition was alerting me that something about this individual was very wrong. Every red flag possible was beginning to show in my mind, and I could not shake that deep, almost overwhelming sense of darkness that I felt coming from this person. There was an evil in him that I couldn't ignore, though I would soon find out exactly why I was feeling this way. After greeting him as politely as I could manage despite my growing hesitations, I began preparing my machine to make him a drink. However, he didn't seem to know what he wanted to order, and I asked him twice what I could get started for him before I silently recognized the fact that he was very likely not here to place an order. Eventually, he abandoned ordering altogether and instead directed our interaction towards small talk. He asked me where I was from and how long I'd been working at the stand, etc. I answered each of these questions with short, abrupt answers, hoping my tone and clear lack of engagement would convey the fact that I wasn't interested in continuing any further conversation, since he was not a paying customer and because I was about to close. After a long pause, he asked slowly, "So, do you have a boyfriend?" Annoyed, I replied curtly, "No." At this point, I was completely ready to end our interaction, so I told him that I needed to finish up closing up and so I could go home. Upon hearing this, he walked away from the window he had been staring at, mentioning in his dissent that he is looking forward to seeing me again very soon. A minute or so passed and he was out of sight. Yet my gut told me that he was not, however, far away. I could feel his dark energy nearby, and I knew he was watching me from somewhere beyond my line of vision. Cautiously, I closed up the stand, locked the doors and windows, and walked to my car and drove home. By the following day, I had all but forgotten the encounter I had with that guy, and went to work as usual. 7 p.m. rolls around once again. I am just about to end my shift to close the stand. I'm nearly finished closing out the register when a brief moment of movement catches my eye from the outside the window on the opposite side of the stand. I turned my head towards the area in question. There, in full view of both me and the security cameras, stood the guy from yesterday. My stomach sank quicker than I knew previously could be possible, and I was immediately very aware of how cold it was inside of that stand. He smiled at me with a predatory grin and waved, and then proceeded to pull open the closed window in front of him. Instead of waiting for me to cross the small distance within the stand that stood between us and open it for him, as I usually would have. And although he didn't present himself aggressively, there was something incredibly threatening about him choosing to do that. It left me feeling helpless, hopeless, unsafe in that moment, and that was not a feeling I was familiar with, or as I learned, particularly fond of. Once I was finally able to bring myself back into a present state of mind, I cleared my throat and told him as firmly as possible that I was off the clock, and I wouldn't be able to make anything for him as my machine was already cleaned and my register closed out for the day. His smile widened further as he replied, "It's okay. I didn't come for the coffee. I came for you." Upon hearing this, I noticed a shift in the energy building between us. The fear I'd previously been overcome with now made a sudden and jolting transition into a redlining level of irritation. "I don't care what you came for," I told him as sternly as I could. "It's going to have to wait until tomorrow, because I am freaking closed." At this, he chuckled a bit before finally raising both his hands in an indication of surrender and saying, all right, fair enough." His smile disappeared, his eyes became even more focused on me, and his gaze intensified. "Then I will see you tomorrow," he said, in a way that felt less like a statement and more like a threat. I swallowed hard, and once he was out of view, I rushed to the window and slammed it shut, throwing the lock into place. Again, despite not being able to visibly confirm his presence nearby, I knew he was there, and I could feel his eyes fixate upon me. I left the stand quickly and got into my car to drive home. This time, however, he remained heavily on my mind for the rest of the night, robbing me entirely of any sleep at all. The following morning was a Saturday, so per my usual schedule, I got up insanely early to work the 5 a.m. opening shift. I arrived at the stand at 10 minutes till 5, and for the first hours of my shift, everything was as it would normally be. 8:30 rolls around, and it's now finally no longer freezing and dark outside, as the November mornings here tend to be. The sun had broken through the clouds and was steadily burning them off. As I was admiring the weather out the window of the stand, I noticed a familiar truck approaching. As it neared closer, I recognized it as my ex-boyfriend Jonathan. I found this exceptionally odd, as he and I were not currently on very friendly terms due to his cheating that ended our relationship about 6 months earlier. He pulled up slowly to the ledge of the open window I was occupying, and I asked him skeptically what he was doing here. "I'm sure I'm probably not someone you were wanting to see today. I know, but I just wanted to come by and wish you a happy birthday and see how you were doing." Just as I was about to thank him for the birthday wishes and inform him that no, indeed, he isn't someone I wanted to see that day, I was still pretty hurt from his cheating, I noticed someone about 100 yards away approaching the stand on foot. It was Ivan. I whispered quickly to Jonathan that I needed him to stay here with me, even if another customer pulls in for service behind him until this guy who just walked up is gone. I could tell he was able to register the fear in my eyes, and he agreed immediately to stay. I brought as much focus into my demeanor as I could manage at the time and turned to face the window on the opposite side of the stand, just as Ivan approached it. I walked slowly over to him and noticed right away that he'd been crying. His eyes were bloodshot, and a few tears dripped slowly down his cheeks. Disregarding his obvious emotional state, I informed him he needed to leave, as I was not going to serve him. Before my statement reached its conclusion, however, he cut my words off abruptly. "I don't need this anymore. You can have it." As he said this, he threw what I later came to recognize as a Russian passport into the stand through the open window. I picked it up puzzled, and with a mix of both caution and disinterest, I asked him why he would no longer be needing it. "I just won't," he said. I allowed his words to hang heavily between us while I attempted to make sense in my mind of what a gesture like this might mean, if anything at all, before I felt a strong bite of dread inside my chest. The fear crept slowly into my throat, before finally escaping past my lips in an audible gasp, bringing Ivan the confirmation he'd been hoping for that I understood was about to happen. No guest to a foreign country would willingly discard or abandon their passport unless they intended to see to completion an act of absolute finality. In an effort to sever the nonverbal conversation taking place within the locked gaze Ivan and I currently had on one another, I glanced over my shoulder at Jonathan, who now had a "what the frick is going on" look on his face. In an instant he recognized the desperate pleading fear in my eyes. This caused his own expression to quickly change to one of panicking urgency as he attempted to understand what had just taken place between the stranger and myself. As I turned back to Ivan and noticed immediately that his crying had stopped, his tears were now replaced with a look of what I can only describe as complete and utter insanity. This is the point where the dynamics of our interaction shifted indefinitely. "God came to me last night in a dream," he began slowly. "He told me you will be my wife. You are my wife. You are mine. You are for me." A sickening, sadistic smile curled the corners of his mouth up in such a way it was almost physically painful to witness. My heart began throwing itself violently against the inside of my chest as adrenaline surged through my system. "You are my wife," he stated again. "You are my wife, and now you come with me, right now." At this point, he planted his hands firmly onto the ledge of the window that stood before him and began to lift himself into it. Realizing now that he was attempting to crawl through the window and into the stand, I practically threw myself across the small distance between he and I and quickly slammed the window shut, locking it. He pushed his way back down off the ledge, paused, and then proceeded to give me a look that made me truly understand the meaning of having one's blood run cold. I felt the inside of me begin to quiver in a way I'd never felt before, an anxious vibration that was working its way throughout my entire body. This was not over yet. I understood this. At this, Ivan offered me a quick wink and began to move with obvious purpose towards the back of the stand. Soon, I could hear a faint but distinguishing beep, 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 beep of buttons being pushed on the electronic keypad that secured the lock on the back door. Ivan was trying to get through the only actual entrance to the stand. In my mind, I knew there was no way he would ever manage to guess the 4-number code and dismiss any arising concern that he would manage to gain entry. "Not going to be that easy," I said under my breath, though I was unsure if I truly believed that. A sudden realization I'd spoken far too soon arrived like a dead weight thrown directly at my gut. The dread that followed what I heard next is something I would never forget. It slammed itself violently into my present state of mind, and with so much force I almost fell back a few steps. Adrenaline immediately overtook my system in its entirety, and in an instant my vision tunneled itself. As I heard the fateful sound of the electronic keypad indicating a successful code entry, followed by the loud and heavy thunk of the steel deadbolt retreating quickly back into the door, all I could see was the door in front of me. Nothing else. It was as if there was a glaring spotlight illuminating the door and the evil that was about to walk through it. All else around me fell into darkness. Time felt as if it had stopped entirely. I no longer had a sense of it, or of the space around me in which I currently occupied. As the door began to slowly push open from the outside, I could hear an almost deafening scream resonate powerfully throughout the walls of the stand, expelling solely by a force of fear. As I stood there completely paralyzed, I bore witness to the largest knife I've ever seen enter through the opening of the door first, followed by Ivan's firmly gripped hand around it. It was only then that I realized the scream I was hearing was my own. As Ivan passed the remainder of his body through the opening of the back door and into the stand, my scream suddenly silenced itself. Before I continue any further, let me just say that until you personally experience a situation that demands you to access your fight or flight response, you have no idea what the response is going to ultimately be. The type of fear that's required to trigger this defense mechanism in the first place is more than most people ever realize. How you react to it will be involuntary. In this moment, I recognize the simple fact that regardless of whatever it is this guy had planned here for me today, I intended to survive it. And not simply survive, but I intended to execute a lesson this guy clearly needed to learn, Never underestimate someone's capability to persevere or the fight that drives them on. Remembering at this time that Jonathan was still in his truck on the other side of the stand, I ran to the window and screamed desperately through the now closed and locked panel of glass, "Jonathan, he's got a frickin' knife." Jonathan's eyes grew huge, and he threw open the driver's side door and flew from his truck towards the back of the building. Then, in the furthest corner of my vision, I caught sight of a dark, looming presence enter into the space of the small interior of the stand. Ivan, now standing no further than 10 feet from me, reeked of an evil that overtook every inch of space within the small building we now occupied together. It made the air so heavy around me that breathing started to become difficult. It felt thick and toxic in my lungs and nearly caused me to choke. As my struggle to breathe increased, Ivan began to close the few feet of space still between us by taking slow, taunting steps in my direction. His knife was gripped firmly in his hand, which rested at his side, but the look he had on his face in that moment was so intense that it felt as if it were made of its own blade. He used his eyes to cut into me deeply, over and over again, and spoke softly through those visual violence, "You are my wife. You are my wife." Ivan ultimately only managed to take a total of 3 steps towards me before I saw an arm being thrown around his neck from behind. As I stood there in a state of paralysis due to fear, I watched as Jonathan pulled Ivan back by the neck with so much force his feet flew out from beneath him. Suddenly both Ivan and Jonathan were on the ground right outside the door, with Jonathan securing Ivan in a headlock that proved nearly impossible to break away from. Jonathan yelled strict instructions to Ivan not to move, not a single muscle, or he would choke the frickin' life out of him. Surprisingly, Ivan remained completely still. He never once made any sign of resistance. Jonathan kicked the knife away from his reach and told me to pick it up, secure it, and call the cops. It would feel like hours before the cops arrived, thanks to the massive amount of adrenaline still in my system, though in reality it was only a few minutes. Soon the entire area was completely overtaken by more law enforcement than I had ever witnessed respond to a single call before. Having moved very little from the place I initially stood since calling 911, I watched as at least 6 cops descended on Ivan at once, relieving the grip Jonathan had around his neck, and forcibly, more than necessary to my silent pleasure, detaining him and carrying him practically hog-tied into a waiting cruiser. Apparently, while speaking with the cops after being securely restrained and unable to flee, Ivan insisted continually that I was his wife. God had told him, after all, that I was intended for him. I belonged to him. God had said. He was simply there that morning to collect that which he had been promised by God.
That would always,
Please lock your doors. Written by Groundbreaking Local.
That kind of crazy.
I posted this a while ago, but it got lost. However, since it's been a year after the incident, I figured this would be a good place to share it, as it's about someone I never ever want to come across again. It all started and ended the day after I took my last final at my community college. I don't know if he was a stalker or if it was just a break-in gone weird. So from the beginning, I remember I was so nervous that I was going to fail this one class and was not going to be able to receive my Associates of Arts degree. Later in the day, I was out at the pool at my apartment complex with some friends and my roommates when I checked my phone and saw that I'd passed my class. I got so excited I told everyone that we were celebrating because I was the last one to have a final. This was 3 days before I got to walk and graduate with my degree, and I decided we should have some fun before we all went our separate ways. As I got later into the night, we decided not to go out and to stay in. We invited a couple more people over and went on with the night. Around 2 in the morning, people started to leave and head to bed, so the only people left were my 2 roommates, both of the people they were dating, and one other friend. We were still messing around, and because our apartment was on the first floor and next to the pool, we decided to go night swimming. As soon as we were done with that, I was ready to just hang out and be in for good for a good night's sleep. My roommates and the other friend all left to go somewhere else for a little while, which was fine with me, and it was nothing out of the ordinary for me to be at home alone. I got some food and went to my room to hang out until they got back. By the way, my room is set up in our apartment all the way back and the furthest away from the front door and the patio door. My room is behind the kitchen and you have to go through the whole apartment to get there. Because our apartment was in the front of the complex and near the pool, it was near the front gate, and at that time the gate was left open because it was broken. I have never had an issue with living this close to the gate until this night. My room has one big window and you can easily see in my room when I don't have the blinds or curtains shut. I had a closet with mirror doors, which if you looked through the window, you could see every part of my room. So while I was waiting for my friend to get back, I fell asleep. The last time I looked at the clock, it was 3:30 in the morning. And a key part of all this was that my bedroom light was still on when I went to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was around 5:30 a.m. There were slow flashes going off, like I had a strobe light going off in the corner of my room. I woke up really confused and thought it was my friends that had come back and they were messing with me. Once my eyes got more adjusted to the now dark room, I realized that in fact, that it was not my friends messing with me, but a single man who was at least 6'1", wearing a green hoodie with the hood over his face in the corner. He was holding a phone up taking pictures of me. Mind you, I had tiny Sophia shorts on with one of my legs hanging out of the covers. I don't think he realized I'd woken up, and when reality really sunk in to me, I said, "What the frick?" And instead of coming at me or running out of my room, the man just put the phone down and walked out of my room, not saying anything. No panic, no nothing, and just walked out. Me being the dumbass I was, I ran after him saying, "Hey!" I tried to follow him out, but once I got to the front door, I didn't see him anymore. I ran back inside and woke up all my roommates, asking if they were messing with me. When they said no, I called the police. I looked around my room and I saw the only thing missing was my laptop that was on my desk in the far corner of my room. The weirdest part about that was the fact that my laptop was in the furthest part of the apartment, the furthest part of my room, and it was behind a closed door. Outside in the kitchen, laying out on the counter, were 3 other MacBooks, 2 wallets, and at least a $300 speaker. But the only thing missing from the whole apartment was my laptop. Later on, I found out that the front door and the patio were never locked. The police couldn't find the guy or my computer, which made things worse because my SIM disk from my camera was in the computer, so all my personal photos from my camera were now accessible to this guy. Then there were things I saw a couple of days later while I was getting ready to move out that freaked me out even more. Like I said earlier, if you look in my window, you can see my closet mirrors and just about my whole room. One thing that was super noticeable about my room was my tapestry. It was a very distinct and different kind of tapestry. It had 2 wolves howling up to the moon, and it was black and white. On moving day, when I was packing my car, I happened to look up, and as it was getting dark, I noticed in the apartment above mine, through the blinds on the wall, was the exact same tapestry as the one that was in my room. What creeped me out even more was the fact that I had little purple lights I put on it from my mom because she knows my favorite color is purple. In that room above mine, the light in the ceiling fans were switched out for purple ones. As if I wasn't creeped out enough, an all-black cat came up to the window, and my stomach started to feel weird because a year before, I had gotten a baby kitten that was all black. In the end, the guy was never found, and I never saw his face, which freaks me out to this day, and I hope I never come across him again. I never got my laptop back, and I never found my SIM disk to my camera. My best advice to anyone in a college town is no matter what, always lock your doors, because you never know who or what you could wake up to. Elderly Lady in Wrong Car, written by L62. Back when I was in high school, my best friend would basically hang out at school together because her dad was the warden of the local prison and his house wasn't even a half-mile from it. Her mom was judgmental and, well, a bit hostile. It was the attitude more than anything that kept me from hanging out over at her house. She was a woman you didn't mess with. One day my friend said her mother came home white as a ghost the night before because when she and her friend had come out of the grocery store, halfway to her car, they stopped and noticed someone in the back seat. She was thinking it was my friend, her daughter, but as she stepped closer she saw it was an elderly woman. Well, she started to go to the car, but her friend stopped her and said that she probably got off the bus from the assisted living center and she had better call the police and let them handle it. The police car pulled up and she pointed at the car. The officer walked up to the window and she watched as the officer snatched the door open and literally yanked the old woman out and pushed her against the car and frisked her. My friend's mom was horrified. That was until the officer snatched the wig off the man's head. She was now frantic because if it hadn't been for her friend, she would have gotten in and offered her a ride home. So always check your back seat. The Thing with No Skin, written by Hayut One. I grew up in a haunted house, rather a haunted neighborhood. It's an old Air Force base that has since been recommissioned for college students and families that go to the school on the outskirts of town. Growing up there, I have experienced many strange things, many of which I cannot explain besides it being paranormal. Even though I know a good bit about the paranormal or the occult, some of these entities prove to be out of my main knowledge base. I've seen my little sister's double, seen multiple shadows in the house with friends present. He quickly left after all that and moved away at once. Had things move around, knocks on doors when no one else was home or asleep, footsteps up and down the hallway, conversations that would mute when you got close to them, and many other things. However, one of the creepiest ones always happened at the main bathroom. It had a small hallway branching from the main hallway. It wasn't very long, but I never felt safe there. During the night, even as a growing adult, I would run as best I could at night because I feared what was behind me. I slowly stopped doing so because I knew that whatever it was, it got some kind of pleasure from it. I slowly started to not feel a presence near as much, but it was still there. One evening, as I'm taking a shower getting ready for bed, I hear a knock, but not from the door. It came from the medicine cabinet. So being the curious person I am, I peeled back the shower curtain to see some of the fog having been wiped off the mirror. I started to take a closer look when I saw a black, slanted eye with no skin around it start to peek its way into my line of sight. I quickly hopped back in the shower and sat there, my back against the wall, not knowing what to do. I eventually turned the shower off and hauled my ass out of there, still dripping wet. The next time I saw this thing, I was walking down the hall after getting home from school, and I'm the only one home. So I start to do what male teenagers do when no one's around. I hear some scuffling, like dogs running around, and the door open. I ready myself for someone to be home. As I walked out of my bedroom door, I hear, "Hey," but muted and not a voice I knew. So I start to make my way towards the front door with my back to the wall, as I felt I might need to dash back into my room for safety. My mistake here was that I was facing the hallway that leads to the bathroom. I move over bit by bit and I hear another voice. It seems to be coming from the living room, so I take another step. Then I see something in the corner of my eye, like a hand pulling back from a corner. I couldn't make it out at the time, but it did freak me out enough until I got in full view of the hallway with this thing, standing there in a grotesque way. Black slanted eyes, no skin anywhere, black claws, and it smelled something awful, more of rotting meat than rotten eggs. I froze for a second before I saw it flinch a little like it was coming for me, and I dashed back to my room. I slammed the door behind me, only to get 3 knocks every few seconds. I don't remember what I said, but it was along the lines of, "I'm not going to be afraid of you, you can't get past this door," and then it stopped. I waited there until someone got home, to which I went outside for the rest of the day, making sure I didn't have to use the restroom at night for any reason. A few months go by, and I'm still uncomfortable in that bathroom and hallway, but not much has happened since, so my guard starts to slip. One night, I believe it was a Friday night, so I was taking a late night shower, Everything is going normal. I'm washing my hair, my face, my body, when suddenly the lights go out. There was a storm going on in town, and we were getting the weak part of it, so I didn't think much of it. I stepped out to turn on the lights and see if the house had power. Sure enough, the house has power, but the bathroom isn't turning on. Yet the exhaust fan was still on. That's when I started to get really worried, and I tried turning the lights on one more time, and with no avail, decided to keep my shower going in the dark. As I got back into the shower, I could feel something breathing on me, breathing on the back of my neck, my shoulders. I felt a brush of what I hoped was just my towel and not something else. As I'm getting out of the shower, I'm drying my hair off and the lights come back on. Awesome! I'm thinking as I start to dry my face. When I pull the towel off, I look up, and the mirror once again doesn't have fog, but the whole lot of it, not just the corner. I looked up a little more and just saw the thing there, right behind me, making a smile of sorts, but its mouth was sewn shut, or so it seemed. I stood there for about 5 seconds, unable to move, before feeling its claws on my shoulder. Closer to my neck, I was suddenly able to move, and again left the bathroom dripping wet, running to my door. I slammed it shut, shaken and trying to gather my nerves. I hear a deep, high-pitched laughter, and I heard the bathroom door close. I went to bed that night with the lights on, all while hearing more footsteps than usual in the hallway. I've seen the thing thrice more, but thankfully none as scary as mentioned above, since I've learned to deal with it and how to protect myself. I haven't heard much of skinless humanoids, so this is one that has always stuck with me. Scariest besides being held against a wall from a vengeful ghost. Sorry for the wall of text, just thought I should get one of those stories out there for discussion. The Time I Got Haunted by a Ghost with No Legs Named Eddie. Written by 88 Del Nina. This is my very first post ever. As soon as I saw the subreddit, I knew I have to share my experience. Sorry if my grammar and spelling is a mess. I'm shaking. It's hard to talk. This happened when I was around 16-ish. I am now 20. Me and a friend of mine thought it would be a good idea to play with a Ouija board one day, at night, in the middle of a park near my house. We asked it the normal teenage questions like, is there anyone there? What's your name? Etc. When it was happening, we never got precise answers, so we just thought it was all fake. I got fed up and said something like, if this was actually real, touch me or make a noise. That's when we heard something and blew it off automatically. He drove me back home after that and just left the board in his car. We never really talked about it again because nothing really happened. It wasn't until a couple days later, when I was alone in his car waiting for him, that I started hearing whispering and tapping noises coming from his trunk where his board was. I looked into the rearview mirror where I caught a glimpse of a boy. It started to freak me out so much that I actually left the car and waited for him outside. When he came back, I asked him if he's seen or heard any weird things, and he said no, so I just thought I was going crazy. For another couple of days, it was all fine and dandy. I didn't hear anything, and I didn't see anything. It wasn't until a week later that I saw him again. It was in the middle of the night, and I got out of bed to use the bathroom. When I opened my door, right in front of it sat a small boy with bloody stubs for legs, wearing old-fashioned clothes. He didn't have a face, but he did have giant black eyes that looked like holes. I blinked once, and he was gone. I just went to the bathroom and went back to sleep. That was the moment everything changed. At night, I started to hear something crawling and dragging itself on the floor of my room. I started hearing things all the time. It would say things like, stay with me, or would constantly call my name. It would close and open doors for me. I had a feeling like something was always watching me and was always right behind me. I saw him once again after all this started. I was going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I have a bad habit of always looking into the mirror as soon as I go into the bathroom. That's when I saw him floating behind me in the mirror, just staring at me with his missing legs and black eyes. I turned around as fast as I could, but he disappeared. That's when I asked him what his name was, and right next to my ear I felt a breath and heard the name Eddie. In a way, it made me feel better and calmer, that I now knew his name. Things continued to happen more often than they used to, but he started to be more helpful in a way. Like opening a door when I asked or closing them when I asked. I honestly didn't want him to leave. I felt comfortable in knowing he was around. Weird, I know. It wasn't until the incident happened that I started to feel unsafe. Eddie never followed me out of the house, or at least I never noticed him out of my house until one day. I was at my then-boyfriend's house when he was at work and his family was away. I was sitting on the couch in the front room when I felt the whole house shake. I don't live in an area where earthquakes ever happen, so I knew it wasn't that. Cabinets in the kitchen started opening and slamming shut. Everything was on the counters flew off. Doors started slamming shut. It wasn't until I screamed for him to stop that he stopped. After that, Eddie became super protective and possessive of me. He used to make me sick so I couldn't leave the house. He used to drain my battery within my phone and my car. He did everything within his power to stop me from leaving. I finally told my mom what was happening. We got a priest to bless me and the house, and we saged the house as well. I haven't seen him since. Now I always have holy water on me, but I'm still not afraid of spirits. This was still one of the most traumatic experiences I've ever had, and I can't tell the story without feeling an uncomfortable amount of pressure on my neck. I hope you all enjoyed all of our haunted tales this evening. If you would like to discuss any of the stories on tonight's podcast, or just chat live with me, join our Discord server. I'm always live on there during and after the podcast every Sunday night starting at 7 p.m. Join our community on our Facebook group page and YouTube channel. If you have a haunting story of your own or artwork and you want to submit it for consideration for the future show, drop me a line on our Reddit page or email address. All our links are below in the description. Special thanks to Darken Mood, Darken_M00D, for all his wonderful art that you can check out on his Reddit page. I want to thank all our brave storytellers, for without them there would be no show. A detailed list of story credits are in the description. But most importantly, I want to thank you, the listener, for taking time out of your day to listen to Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. I hope you have a wonderful night, and as always, sweet dreams. Turn me down. Alright guys, that's the end of the podcast for this evening. I hope you enjoyed the stories that I had for you. Tune in next week at 7 p.m. I'm going to have some more gruesome tales. I hope you like the new setup. I am going to be changing it in and out. I've got 3 different skulls now and some different scarves and stuff to kind of make it interesting for October, or Feartober. If you have any questions, comments, or would like to submit a story, make sure that you hit the links below. If anything else, I hope you have a wonderful night, and as always, sweet dreams.